Our mid to late 20s is often when we buy our first house. Many times this is perfectly fine, however sometimes people buy houses before they're ready, and that can lead to catastrophe. So how do you know if you're ready to buy a home? Today, we're going to answer that question, as well as the question about how to save a down payment for a home in general. Let's get started. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. Generally speaking, there are 3 rules of thumb when it comes to buying homes. They are the 28-36 rule, the 30% solution, and the 25% method. The 28-36 rule states that you should spend no more than 28% of your gross income on your housing. This includes your mortgage payments, property taxes, PMI, and HOA if you have them, as well as any other related fees. The rule also states that no more than 36% of your gross income should be spent on your housing costs along with all of your other debt payments. Or in other words, 36% of your gross income should go towards your mortgage principal, interest, insurance, property taxes, PMI, HOA fees, and all other minimum payments on your debts like car loans, student loans, credit cards, and other personal loans. The 30% solution states that no more than 30% of your gross income should be allocated towards housing costs. Technically, this rule also advises that you have no more than 20% of your take-home pay going towards non-housing debts. However, unlike the 28-36 rule, it doesn't have a second layer for you to adjust your housing costs if you're in a situation where you're up to your eyeballs in debt. So this could lead to some very tight budgets if you have a fair amount of debt relative to your income. The 25% method is the one popularized by Dave Ramsey. It states that you should allocate no more than 25% of your take-home pay towards your housing costs. So this is undoubtedly the most conservative of the 3 rules of thumb and generally works very well if you can manage it, especially in situations where you need to allocate a larger portion of your income towards other financial goals, such as giving, paying off debt, or investing in your future. If you are unable to afford a home based on any of these 3 rules, you definitely should not be buying, even if you do qualify for a loan, which can sometimes happen. This may lead to you missing out on some real estate appreciation once in a while, but that's a far better problem to have than being unable to afford to keep a roof over your head. With that out of the way, let's go forward assuming that you can afford to buy a house. How do you actually save for the down payment? Ultimately, the answer is you need to either earn more, spend less, or some combination of the 2. I know that isn't the answer we'd necessarily like to hear, but it is the truth. Thankfully, there are some things that most of us will be able to do to save money fairly quickly. For most people, the largest expenses they have are related to shelter. The combination of housing or apartment costs, maintenance, utilities, and the related insurance premiums quickly add up to a bundle of cash. In a way, this is actually fortunate, as it gives us a huge opportunity to save money more quickly. Rent hacking is a term that refers to you sharing the costs of housing with others. It takes on many forms depending on who's using it. Similar to many college students, you could share the apartment with some roommates and split the costs that way. You could rent an apartment that allows you to sublet to other tenants, which would help you to cover some of the costs. And in some cases, you could actually cover the costs completely, depending on the situation. Or you could rent out your place on travel sites like Airbnb to earn some extra cash and offset some of those costs. Whichever way you decide to go, the end result is your portion of the housing costs go down, and you're then able to save more money. With the median rent alone in the US being just shy of $1,200 a month, you can see why this strategy can be a huge money saver. If we figure that utilities and other costs add up to an additional $200 a month, which I'd say is fairly conservative, and you split those costs evenly with a roommate, that's still $700 a month that you're saving. $700 a month at 8% returns is about $50,000 in 5 years, just by itself, which is a pretty good result for just one strategy, if I do say so myself. In addition to saving money on housing, you could do a zero-sum budget to find out other areas you may be overspending in. If you've never done this before, it can be an eye-opening experience. Some people find they're spending significantly more on eating out than they thought. Others find there's some subscription services that they no longer use and just forgot to cancel. Still others find no glaring oversights in their budget, but many categories that could use some fine-tuning. They then research ways to keep their utility and other ongoing costs down and save money. Depending on your situation, this could lead to savings of a few $dozen a month or even a few hundred. When paired with rent hacking strategies, it can allow you to save some serious cash pretty quickly. Another way that you can save money is by paying off your debts. This is admittedly more of a long-term strategy, but with those minimum payments gone, you'll have a larger portion of your income that you'll be able to put towards saving for a down payment, and later towards the mortgage itself, or just having more money to put towards your investments. This will actually have a double effect on your goal to save up and buy a house, as it will become much easier to get a mortgage if your debts are under control. Finally, you can give yourself a head start on your savings plan by selling things you don't use anymore. While this may not have a game-changing effect on most people's timelines, it can shave off as much as a few months' worth of saving for a down payment. However, if you are one of the lucky few that have some big-ticket items that you can afford to sell, such as a car, the effect could be much, much more noticeable. To see how big of a difference this can make, let's take a look at John and Jane. John and Jane take home $4,000 a month, and they live on just under $3,500 a month. Their $3,500 monthly budget is split between their housing, food, debt, and other expenses. They pay $1,500 a month in housing costs for their 2-bedroom apartment in the Midwest. $500 a month goes towards food, with $200 of that being the amount they spend on eating out. They have 3 different debts that total just under $500 a month in minimum payments. The first debt is a credit card that has a $1,000 balance and a minimum payment of $20 a month, with an interest rate of 15%. Their second debt is a student loan of Jane's that has a $10,000 balance, a minimum payment of $103.64 a month, and an interest rate of 4.5%. Their third debt is a car loan of John's that has a $20,000 balance, a minimum payment of $372.86, and an interest rate of 4.5%. $1,000 a month goes towards their other expenses, and the last $500 is being saved for a down payment on their future home. Currently, they're looking at a $200,000 home and want to make at least a 20% down payment, so their savings goal amounts to $40,000. However, they haven't let themselves fall victim to house fever, thank goodness, and are willing to be flexible with their move-in date, especially if it means getting a better return on their money. Therefore, they decide to invest for their down payment in the stock market. On average, they get an 8% rate of return per year. Now, I should note that for most people, particularly those that need to have their down payment ready by a specific date, this probably isn't going to be the best place to put your money. The volatility of the stock market is usually going to be too big of a risk. However, since John and Jane are flexible enough to rent longer if their investments happen to take a dive during their savings period, they decided it was worth the risk to them. Under these assumptions, it should take John and Jane about 64 months to save for their down payment. That's a little over 5 years, which, while manageable, would probably be a little bit longer than most of us would want it to take. Thankfully, though, John and Jane can do better. In order to free up more money in their budget, John and Jane find a roommate to live with. They split the costs of the apartment evenly, which brings John and Jane's portion of the bill down to $750 a month. This allows them to save a total of $1,250 a month. Using the same assumptions as before, John and Jane would be able to have their down payment ready in just 29 months. That's less than 2.5 years and almost 3 years sooner than the previous scenario. Still though, they can do better. If they wanted to optimize their down payment savings even further, they could lower their food costs by going out to eat less. Hypothetically anyway, if they didn't go out to eat at all, they could shave an additional 3 months off their savings timeline. At that point, it would take them a mere 26 months to save up a $40,000 down payment. While that level of cutting may not be sustainable for them depending on how much they value eating out, they still might be able to shave a month or two off their previous estimate. And yet still, they may be able to do a little better. They could do this by finding things around the apartment they no longer use, and selling them for an initial boost to their savings. A few $100s to start off with could shave a month or more off of that timeline, which would bring them down to pretty darn close to 2 years flat, to save $40,000. And lastly, while paying off their debt wouldn't shorten their timeline for getting a down payment stashed away, it would have other long-lasting benefits. The first of which is making it easier for them to qualify for a mortgage, assuming they haven't already. Currently, their debts account for 12.5% of their income, which is above the amount recommended by the 28-36 rule. It would also free up more money for them to play with before and after getting their home. The costs associated with homes include more than the mortgage payment. There are potential repair costs to handle right away, ongoing regular maintenance costs, property taxes, homeowners insurance, and sometimes even PMI and HOA payments. These costs will need to be added to whatever the mortgage payment will end up being in John and Jane's new budget. And paying off those debts will free up an additional $500 a month to help combat any unwelcome surprises in those areas. And it'll also allow them to either pay down that mortgage a little faster or invest more month to month to grow their nest egg. So those are some strategies for saving for a down payment on a house. Have you used any of these strategies? If so, how did they work out for you? If not, what other strategies did you use to save for your down payment? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you want to learn more about buying a home, you can check out my video on how to buy a home at the link on your screen. With that being said, be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already, and thanks for watching.